I'm joined today on the panel by a couple of very distinguished guests and experts. So I'm going to pick them up before we get going. Bradley York-Biggs from Institute of Digital Engineering and Axel Bindel from HSSMI. So I'll just maybe transfer it over to you guys just to cover a bit of introduction, and then we'll get stuck in.
Sure. Will we get first?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for inviting me here today. So my name is Axel Bindel, Executive Director at HSSMI. So we are a sustainable manufacturing innovation consultancy. Our vision is to support companies to transfer to net zero, and of course the digital side of it is a very key element on that side as well. We are also have been part of a UK consortium called the DRL tool, so digital readiness level. We try to find a measure as well for digital readiness. So I think there's the meeting of hearts here, and it's very, of course, work very closely with Bradley as well. And how can we get to a position where we can actually measure and compare where we are in our journeys? And we do that very well on the technology readiness level, manufacturing readiness level. So it's an interesting one. How do we get there on the digital side as well? So,
excellent. Thank you. Looking forward to it. Bradley.
Thank you for the invitation. Much appreciated. As you mentioned, I'm CEO of the Institute of Digital Engineering. Most of the work we do is focused on the automotive sector. We also lead the Advanced Digitalization Mission for the Automotive Council. So we're charged with trying to raise the capability of the way we engineer products in the UK and accelerate the way we bring products to market, specifically cars. But I think, going to Axel's point, the world is changing. Certainly the world of the automotive world is rapidly changing, where we have to start thinking about mobility and not just cars. So we need to start thinking about energy distribution, energy supply, telecoms, infrastructure, and start thinking about future mobility solutions rather than just the car. And that has massive challenges around taking a much more systems approach to things, and that's where digitalization and data obviously must play a very important role in protecting that capability. Certainly the other focus we've got, which is why we work with Axel as well, we have a productivity issue, and it's not just about the primes, the big OEMs. In terms of if the companies that exist in the UK want to be successful, it's the 80% of the companies that make the majority of the automotive sector that we have to find a way of developing or bringing up their capability. Obviously, the only really way you can do that is by being able to measure in the first place. To try to measure progress, and that's again why Axel and I have been working together in the past, and are going to work together in the future to make sure we have the right tool to do that.
Excellent. Well, welcome both. I'm just conscious that Bradley's going to end up with a very stiff neck because he's going to be turning to Axel and then to me. True. So thank you both for that. And as I said at the beginning, I'm Mark Walker-Smith. I look after our EMEA operations at Digitopia. And a big part of what I do, one of my focuses both in the UK but also across the EMEA region is that I suppose awareness of digital maturity and why it's important, and why actually it's an absolute key essential in tracking progress for digital transformation, and all of the things actually that Halil and Nick in particular have spoken about on the way into this panel. So I'm very, very interested and looking forward to the conversation today. I think we'll cover a lot of ground, and it should be very interesting. So I'm going to kick off, and I've got my David Frost tablet here, so which is, for probably none of the audience will understand that reference unless you were as old as I am, but I shall refer to my sort of points here. So Axel, I thought I'd come to you first, really, from the point of view of sort of almost taking a step back to the digital transformation piece. It's one of those terms that probably means different things to different people, and certainly in different sectors and different levels within organisations. But I know that there's sometimes that concept of digital transformation is really just about a technology piece, and I think Nick might have touched on that in his speech earlier on in his presentation. I wonder if you want to sort of, I know you have a view on that, and sort of pick up on that, and we'll go from there.
Yes, I do think quite passionately about that. I think, yes, we all know the importance about digital transformation, but as really an enabler for business problems. Ultimately, if we want to achieve something, we want to be productive, we want to get a new product to market, etc. And I would maybe start with provocatively. It's not a technology issue. I think technology is it's an important element of it. But I think, and as well, that's why the measurement, I think it is important, allows us to get a bit of a step back. And I personally think it has to focus on three areas. It's a technology on one side we want to achieve, but we do have to have the leadership in place as well to transform that. And we need to have the culture in as well to drive that it is going to be productive throughout the organization or across the supply chain. So I think those three elements are really belonging very, very closely together if you want to drive a digital transformation. And it is easier if there's something to communicate on where we want to go. And that's where I think the digital readiness or the digital maturity, I'm going to call it, is a good way to communicate that and drive that forward.
Yeah, and so in a way, having that slightly, more holistic view across the organisation is quite key, because that would bring in not just technology or even the innovation elements, but culture and the people and the other factors. And those things are key, I guess, to the success of a sort of real transformation, if I can call it that, not just a technology-based lift and shift of legacy technology. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think we've seen that in other parts of business. I think we shouldn't forget we've been very, very successful in business process change in general. If I'm thinking about lean manufacturing principles, were extremely good, and if we go in a shop floor, you see that, how that is happening. And I think not everything is different on digital as well. So I think some of those concepts we can translate across. And I think what we know there is it takes a culture and a leadership to drive that through. And it's interesting if you take that analogy and you open up, for example, a desktop or your own computer desktop, and you see that, and we're probably a little bit far away from 5S, and we see the documents scattered around. But I think principles around that can be translated as well.
Yeah.
But that means we need to assign responsibilities, leadership within certain areas. That's why I think it needs that holistic view on how we approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bradley, I know you have a strong view on the sort of strategic nature of digital transformation. You've talked about that many times.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the whole subject area is it is so multifaceted and encompasses an entire enterprise. Communication becomes a massive challenge,
of course,
because and that's sometimes is the whole subject area's worst enemy, is how broad and deep it is when we start talking about digitalization. I didn't even say it today myself, but I agree. The components that Axel talks about, it very much, to be honest, it's not mainly about the technology. The technology is there and evolving at a massive rate of knots. The bigger challenge is culturally and from a leadership perspective, are organizations or large enterprises ready to take the step and transform? And the other real danger that we spoke about before is actually it's become sort of fashionable to look at digital transformation, and it can start to kill businesses at an incredible rate of knots if done incorrectly. I mean, it's not by accident that sort of 75-80% of IT projects fail. And I think that the concern is if everybody rushes headlong and somewhat blindly into digital transformation, that'll be the undoing of many companies who aren't ready. And therefore, I'm a great believer, and there has to be a step before that to look at what value are you trying to get out of your business? What new business models are you trying to unlock?
Yeah.
How strategically is this going to grow your organization or enterprise and deliver your shareholder objectives? And then start architecting your business around where you actually need to transform. If you try and apply digitalization across every part of your business, it'll kill you. So apply it in the right place, and then importantly, obviously, then don't try and boil the ocean. Create a minimal viable proposition to some degree that is going to take the organization with you, and quick wins that demonstrate value in digital, not just for the senior leadership team, but the employees as well, and take it from there.
I think that's absolutely key, and you know, Nick was talking about that kind of sort of the exercise analogy or whatever, which is you know, starting with the outcome that you want to expect, which is whatever, getting fitter, losing weight, whatever it might be, and you know, working back then to how you would achieve that. Yeah, maybe a regime of exercise, and the measurement is absolutely key in the middle.
Yeah, we've just been having the same conversation this week on a webinar on digital twins, which is obviously a massively topical subject.
Yes.
But again, I've always said, first start on the value bit. Why are you creating a digital twin? What are you trying to learn?
Yeah.
And then architect your digital twin accordingly. And it's the same with digital transformation at a higher level.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if I just quickly, I think that's why the name digital transformation is maybe, I wouldn't say unhelpful, but sometimes it's a
panacea.
Yeah, or a bit misleading almost.
Because we do have to start with what really is we want to achieve, and then digital becomes a tool for us to get there. But it's not always that full-out digitalization leads you there only. Sometimes there might be different things, rearranging of processes, etc. So I think very important. I would fully agree with that. We have to start with what do we want to achieve?
Absolutely.
And then step back, what can digital do to do that? And I'm a strong believer that digital can help a lot on reducing risks, time, cost. But if we're not careful, we create a wrong communication as well. And then it becomes down to, I've got this great new technology, how can I apply that?
Yeah, that's right. Wrong way. Absolutely. And I know we've spoken before about this concept of which I think is a really interesting one, and I'm not sure everybody gets, but not unlearning what you've learned from the physical world, you know, and often people think, well, we have a manual set of processes or physical operational aspects or whatever, and we just need to absolutely, you know, move everything and change everything to go digital. But there's a huge amount of learning from the physical world, and the digital aspects need to be around the application and making the most of those capabilities, you know, for again, aligned with the outcome and the business benefits you want to get.
Yes, I think that not unlearning or already learned. I think that's what I mentioned as well early on actually the things we're quite good at, and processes, change management, etc., which we have done. The example of the lean I gave, and we can translate that into the digital world. I think it's just that mindset we need to change. It's not everything is new as a blank sheet of paper. If we go to digital, actually, there's a lot of things we can translate across.
And especially from the world of the car world as well, again, which is sort of my sort of core area of focus. I think, you know, where we're looking at developing products that we can regularly interrogate what's happening on the product, especially with the advent of battery electric cars, etc. We can learn an awful lot for how this product's used as a core business, and make decisions on behalf of the customer. That means when he starts the car up, he can have longer range, better performance, better durability, without bringing the car in for a service. So that close coupling, the data that we can derive from the way the products perform in the market, with the core engineering efforts, and using tools like machine learning to reduce the human effort in creating insight from it. Those are massive new fields that are coming. So there's the operational side of how can you run your business with digital transformation, but there's also the unlocking new business models, which is an imperative. Delivering net zero and the environmental imperative, of course. But unless we close couple the how's the product performing and how we engineer the next version of it together, then we will maybe not be the best at developing the right solutions for the future.
And I guess the data is absolutely key to underpinning that. Not just the data itself, but how it's then utilised and analysed and fed back into the, as you say, back into the process.
And we're not shy of data. Actually, I mean, there are organisations that are shy of data, like we talked to the fusion reactor guys, they haven't got a fusion reactor. So architecture, fusion power station is typical. Actually, we're not short of data in the automotive. Our cars are censored up. You know, a modern C-Class Mercedes or Ford Mondeo is more complex than an Airbus A380. With 120 microprocessors and about 130 million lines of code. And we have lot of sensors. So
course.
there's lots of data. The challenge is deriving insight from that data. And I think that's what has shifted a little bit now, is around some of the new science and technology, can augment our human intelligence. And for me, I use the term augmented intelligence, not artificial, because for me, there always has to be a human in the loop when you're talking about engineering a product.
Yeah.
But I think that is the brave new world.
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't think we're shy of data. I think it was Nick earlier who mentioned how much data we produced in the last 20 minutes. So we definitely don't.
No.
And I think
It's how you use it, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's what you do with it.
How do we get access to it? How do we make sure we don't create duplicates and discrepancies? And ultimately, how do we get insights?
Get actionable insights. And that's the key. That's all it's about, is creating actionable insights.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. And I want to sort of pick up on I think it's something you mentioned there, Bradley, around I can't remember the phrase you used, but there is some latent ability for digital transformation to really.
Yeah. Slightly dramatic.
But I think it's a very provocative but very interesting thing, and I'd like to sort of look into that in a little bit more detail and how that sort of plays out in the real world and your experiences really of that from the kind of work you've done in previous lives, or certainly the kind of work that actually you've been doing with many companies. I guess it boils back to, it heads us a little bit back to the measurement piece around companies understanding where they are and where they're starting from, and particularly where they're trying to get to as a sort of starting point, really. And then bringing that back to how do we get to where we need to get to? Because I think we've all experienced in our own sort of working lives, depending on which side of the fence we're on, just that fact that there's all sorts of things going on, all sorts of work streams and initiatives, and everybody is busy. But often, if it's not, that progress isn't being tracked or is really visible, it can be quite dangerous.
Yeah, without a doubt, and especially, it's around a lot of the nervousness I'm feeling within industry is around value.
Yeah.
And it's basically having measurable progress. And that measurement isn't just that you've developed this technology and you've moved the technology on, it's what was the impact on the business.
Yeah.
And creating that trust in the technology within an organization. So I think it's not just about evolving the technology, it's evolving the value and evolving the cultural learning within the organization.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, isn't it? The value isn't just about a new widget or the technological aspects, as we said at the beginning. It's all those things. Value can be derived from cultural aspects that maybe need to change to embrace the new processes or the new approach or whatever it might be.
You usually got to get the CFO on board. That's always the cursor. You've always got to have that financial value, which isn't always obvious.
Yeah,
but yes, you're quite right.
Absolutely.
And if I maybe quickly on the value discussions, when we run those kind of sessions, typically on a workshop style, I think similar as you do.
Of course.
When the value I found is that organizationally, in those measurement sessions, we do bring together a wide variety of people from the organization, all different parts, so from HR to process and so on. And I think, that discussion on sitting together to say, where are we right now at the moment? I think that's quite a helpful one, because not always those people talk with each other all the time and then one same spot together. And then to define together, where do we want to be? And that often I found is creating that. On one side, yes, there are technological things where people say, okay, we need more data from here or from there, or we could use machine learning or something. But often it's also driven, how do the processes actually work? So how do we actually get the value out? How do we make sure I get permission to get this data, etc.? So it becomes more an organizational discussion rather than purely, as we said, a technology discussion. And I think that's what I find the real value, that then together you can say, how can we fix that? Where do we go there? And then digital transformation becomes then an output and a solution on how you get better as an organization.
Yes.
I think if you don't do that, the fear is you develop your digital transformation, and then you go to the organization and it comes across like here's an additional process to follow, and it's not perceived as actually
as
you make
beneficial.
life easier, you create more value. And I
Yeah.
think that's why, again, let's step back. The measuring digital readiness has a huge benefit, in my opinion, because it allows you as an organization to look at it from a slightly different angle.
I couldn't agree more.
I think just to add to that, I totally agree. I think the other bit that we probably haven't touched upon yet is on the value chain as well. I think it's really important for, and again, we've had some interesting conversations with Jaguar Land Rover recently where they're taking quite a strong-armed approach because they have to, because it's down to their survival in terms of what they're demanding of their value chains to support them in terms of evolving their digital maturity.
Right.
Because there's no good them thinking they're going to have a fully virtual model of their next Defender. I'm just throwing it out there. If they can't actually get the certified digital models of the components from the supply base to feed into that model. So they are taking quite a strong-armed approach, saying, look, either you step up and you take this transformation in these areas, or we're not going to be able to work with you.
That's really
but obviously it's not just beating them with a stick.
No.
You've then got to give them the tools and nurture
to bring
ability
the overall,
to make sure they go. So they are laying out, very clearly what they're expecting of, but there's the other side that then you've got to nurture, support, and make sure they get. Because if you have no suppliers capable of delivering, then you're going to fail. Exactly.
To not put
but that value chain, and the sort of moving that value chain, no matter what your industry, up that maturity scale and that probably represents 80-85% of the automotive sector is that value chain rather than just the prime OEM.
Yes.
Unless you've got that broader clustered capability, then we'll fail.
And that's a really good point. And we've seen that in at various ends of the supply chain, the manufacturer end, but also that supply chain and suppliers themselves. You mentioned Jaguar Land Rover there, but are you seeing across the automotive industry that is everybody's doing that, or are there some that are leading the charge like JLR? Or
not everybody. I think JLR are, and they're one of those. They've got a big department called digital engineering capability with a director that leads it now. So they're definitely. But I think it's one of those things that. There's the lions, the sheep, and the mules. There are the lions. Quite often, the lions are the new disruptors on the block. They're doing this stuff anyway. There's some lions like Jaguar Land Rovers are fast followers going, blimey, we need to change and think about what we're doing. There's the sheep that will eventually get there. Yeah. And then once they've got that, you've got your mules that will stand out like sore thumbs that will be either forced to change or won't be
around.
So those are the three categories. So I think JLR are one of those, but there are definitely mules out there that are slow to the party.
No, I think
but the only, this sounds harsh, but there are lots of new startup companies out there waiting to eat their lunch as well.
So it's competition from all sides, really, isn't it? It's and that's why fundamentally all this stuff is, should be core to that thinking. And I couldn't agree more with what Axel mentioned about that kind of alignment. Of often we find we've run well over 100 of these studies now in all sectors, in various places across Europe and beyond, and almost in all cases, we find that one of the major benefits that comes back from the customer end is fine, they're getting a maturity score and they're understanding a lot more about the gaps and weaknesses, but a lot of it is that kind of alignment. It's the vision setting, the goal setting, as a leadership team, either they don't get together in that kind of basis, or even if they do, they're not really talking about those, they're probably talking more about financial performance or whatever it might be. So that kind of sort of holistic view and making sure that all areas of the business are more aligned with the corporate goals, not just the CEO and the CXOs, but various function heads, etc. We find that as a major sort of feedback on the benefit side. So I agree with all of that.
Yeah, I just on the supply chain side, I think, of course, there are probably certain parts of the supply chain who are driving along and encourage others. And I truly believe there are benefits across the supply chain in digitalization. And I think probably where you maybe sometimes need help or coordination across the supply chain is to understand how do we share information, how do we share insight,
right?
Where's the ownership? Where there's a remainder, can I protect that? And again, it becomes more organizational. How do we work together, and how some processes can be shifted around as well. So but I guess there's a big driver and a benefit could be across the whole of the industry.
And I guess historically, a lot of suppliers have sort of had, they've had a connection, I guess, to sort of each end of what they do, an input and output almost. But now I think there is that needing to be that appreciation of, across the supply chain, that they're one part of quite a complex and hopefully quite digitally mature, particularly if it's being driven from the manufacturer end. So.
And I think just to come back on the digital readiness, and I think that what we discussed in the past extensively. I think if we talk about supply chain, the question still becomes then, do we have comparable measures?
Yeah.
Yes.
How can we make sure one supply chain partner is measured by company A and the other one by company B, but that they are comparable?
Yes.
Measures.
Yes.
That is the challenge. I think that's why the entry tried to say that's why I think the heart of minds is how do we get there to that?
Yes. I think that's
discussed the DRL tool as well. So how do we get there to have a national or
because it needs to have that consistency and that standardization of approach for it to be meaningful, really. Yeah, agree with that. Good, excellent. Okay. So really sort of picking up on the sort of measurement piece, really, and that kind of sort of strategic review that I think we've all touched on. I think one of the things we would all agree, and it's sort of picking up on that sort of last point you made there, Axel, is having a good quality, and we'll come on to what that means, sort of digital maturity model and an approach and methodology is key to this. And some of that is standardization, some of it is granularity and depth of sort of detail and whatever. And I know that's something obviously you guys have worked on before, and we're hoping, with conversations we're having, we can continue the discussion, and obviously it's close to our heart, given what we do with Digital Maturity Index and what you guguys have previously done with DRL tool, etc. I know, Bradley, you feel quite strongly about this, having I don't want to say industrial strength because that's quite glib, but having a structured, standardized digital maturity model is quite key to that.
Yeah, it is for many of the reasons why we relate. Yeah, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
Yeah,
I think it's Kelvin who said that actually originally.
But it's one of our strap lines.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's not me who said it. But it's true.
Yeah.
And again, to Axel's point, it's not just about measuring one organisation; it's being able to come up with a comparative measure across different organisations. And ideally, then also on an international basis as well. So you are, where you sit relative to a similar based company in America or in China, etc. Ideally,
yes.
So I think, so I think being able to measure it is really, really important. But I think that the real key benefits are around helping strategically. An organisation understand where it's trying to get to.
Yes, and that lifting of the level in the. Sorry, actually.
Just while you were talking, I thought, wouldn't it be great if you have a location study that you would take this into account? If a region could promote our region and local supply chain has a high digital readiness level.
Yeah.
And that would become a deciding factor. I think it would be something great. We have many other factors.
Yes, but in Ford, because I know you worked closely with Ford in the past, very close to their PPAP levels, didn't they? Parts maturity as part of sourcing parts so they were measuring suppliers based upon their PPAP levels.
Okay, right.
So it's one could argue it's slightly simpler, but essentially you could do the same thing with organisations where their digital maturity level are. And that could be a factor when they're applying to be a supplier to an OEM, that is part of their credentials.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost sort of, yes, because I'm guessing, there'll be a whole range of factors that get taken into account when suppliers are being picked
you've got to be really careful with it. So it should be one of a number of factors.
Exactly right. But I think it's quite an important one, and similar to what the guys were talking about earlier on in terms of key factors for a CEO or whatever would be, lots of KPIs around profitability and, sustainability and a number of things. And we would say, I think we'd all agree, digital maturity is another element of that. It's quite an important element. It's not, it's not the only element, but I think it increasingly is becoming, a key measure almost whether organisationally or from a supply chain piece or whatever. No, that's great. I can't believe we're almost heading to time. It's unbelievable. But just in the last few minutes, I was really wanted to sort of think about, based on all of those things you said, and we could talk about this stuff for hours, obviously, but maybe a few sort of key sort of summary points almost for the people that are out there and you know, people who are probably nodding what you guys are talking about and buying into it, but you know, key sort of recommendations or summary. So for instance, you know, there is this absolute knowing where you are on the digital journey, and that's quite a sort of vague statement, but I think it plays into measurement, it plays into strategy, it plays into that stepping back. And the less is more thing is something that we see a lot of is, and I think Halil talked about it, and possibly Nick as well, that often there's so much going on, or there's a desire to do so much under the banner of digital transformation. It is quite important to really focus on, you know, a few key areas that will give you perhaps the most value in the shortest time, or will align what you're doing against the corporate goals. Are there any sort of, you know, on that sort of, what are the sort of key strap lines you would throw out there for people to really to sort of summarise perhaps what we've talked about for half an hour?
Sure, a strap line, but I think what I would maybe want in a summary to that is that digital transformation is scalable to a business. I think it doesn't need to be, we don't need to get in there with a preconceived understanding it's X. And also, we not only, all companies want to be at level 5. So I think what I would say is it needs to be right for every business.
Yeah.
And it can be right for every business, be that a small SME or a large corporate.
Good point.
And if we start with what do we want to achieve and how much resources we have to do that, but I think then it is right for everybody. It doesn't need to be huge amounts and everyone does the same. I think that's what I would
it's not one size fits all.
It needs to really fit to every individual company, organization, or supply chain, and it can be scaled to that level. And I guess the conversation of where each organization wants to be is so important, because then it fits into what you want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree again with everything else you said. It's a slightly different context. I think my guidance would be bold, be brave, but manage the risk. And I think on that, I think to a point, you know, there has to be a place for it, and you've got to make sure you fit it in. What we're seeing some really good companies, actually like Boeing doing, for example, create Pathfinder projects. If you're not prepared to take a bigger, bolder, you know, enterprise-wide view, then find a part of your organization where you are prepared to be bold, maybe with a small team,
right? Yes.
Maybe who you know, where you can try this stuff out in a controlled environment. So for me, it doesn't have to be one size fits all, as Axel says. It could be a subdivision where you manage the risks. It's maybe not your hero product, but it's an important product that you need to bring. You can afford to take greater risks with to develop this capability, and that division or that project could have a greater level of digital maturity than maybe your mother enterprise. Yes. And then the key is then how to disseminate that across the organization afterwards. So I think the key is be bold, take more risk than they have done, because the half-life of IP is significantly reduced in the last 10 years. So to me, I see many organizations that are paranoid about sharing data and moving forward, and ironically, they're worrying about the wrong things.
Yes.
Because by the time they're worried about it and get to the point where they're sharing, the competition will be way ahead of them. So I think it's a question of doing something and doing it now. Of course, take a pragmatic view and manage the risk, but don't not do anything.
Excellent. And I think, you know, for me, you'd expect me to say this coming from a Digitopia perspective, but absolutely, you know, that fundamental of you can only manage what you measure, and therefore, you know, and I think, you know, that takes us back into the measurement, it takes us back into the approach and the methodology, but and the strategic stepping back and looking holistically. You need to have a view of where you are and where you're going to get to in a fairly sort of focused and structured way, and then you can manage whether it's work streams or cultural change or whatever it might be. So that would be my sort of, you know, my sort of final thought on that. I don't know if you've got any questions. Ben, was around whole sort of sustainability piece and how how important, fundamental is the digitalisation piece to sustainability, because there's certainly, we're working with some academic institutions about trying to work on that link between digital maturity and digitalisation, and ultimately what that means for sustainability measures. I mean, you know, it's a huge one. I know you've done a lot of work in that space, I'm sure, Axel, but I guess you would, you know, it's a fundamental thing, and it is just as important for us to try and do more work on getting that correlation between, you know, digitalisation and sustainability measures. I guess that's something that we all should be looking at to work on.
Yeah, yes, I think there's definitely a link on digitalization and sustainability, visibility across the supply chain, or if I want to recycle or reuse a product at the end of life, I need to know what's happening with it. So I think, as you said, it's a huge topic, but definitely topics which are linked.
And will become increasingly important and on people's minds, I think, as we go forward.
Well, I think putting it even more bluntly, it's a race. You know, the environmental imperative is clear and present.
Indeed.
It's a race internationally to develop the next generation of architectures, no matter whether it's a power station or a car or a plane.
Indeed.
And you know, those nations and those organisations that bring those products to market fastest are the ones who will succeed.
Indeed.
And those ones that can bring the products to market fastest and cheapest are the ones that will employ digital methods of shortening the time to market.
Yeah, and there's the link.
And getting rid of most of what they do in the physical world, they've got to push into a correlated, appropriate fidelity digital world.
Absolutely.
So it's a race, and we're all limbering up on the start of the 100-metre line at the Commonwealth Games, which hasn't happened yet. Some of us will be going to Bird, and some of us will have the Lakey Nike trainers on. And you know,
yeah, and there'll be a gap. There'll be a goal.
There'll be a gap in terms of developing those future architectures. And we're just going to make sure. Well, you know, that what I'm paid is to make sure that we're not going to the button in the UK.
Excellent. Well, I hope whoever sent that question in, I hope that's given you some answer, and you know, it probably be the subject of a future webinar in its own right. Was there any other questions that come in, Ben? Now, so I think we're just about to time. It just remains for me to say thank you so much, Bradley and Axel, for joining us today, giving us your time, giving us, more importantly, your insights and your view and your, you know, all of your expertise on that. So I really appreciate it. Thank you again.